Today on Weird Wyandotte, we're going to find out about our very own D.B. Cooper. We're going to find out what happens when you go missing 3 months after your wedding. And even what happens when you're deceased and your family doesn't let the police know. Hi, I'm Jacqueline Malnar. I am the local history librarian here at Bacon Library, and this is Weird Wyandotte. Today I'm going to share with you curious stories and little known facts of Wyandotte, Michigan. So first, we're going to start off with a question I get asked all of the time. People come to me frequently and say, Jackie, I've heard that there were tunnels under Biddle. Is this true? Well, let me tell you. There were never tunnels under Biddle. Instead, what a lot of people are remembering was the Wyandotte Comfort Station. What this was, it was underground bathrooms. They were at the corner of Maple and First and Biddle. They were built there in 1935, and they were closed ultimately in 1965 because of vandalism. So a lot of people will remember going underground. They will think that maybe they were crossing the street. People come up with lots of different stories about it, but really it was just our underground restroom. So now we're going to get on to one of my favorite stories, and that is of Martin McNally, our very own skyjacker. Now a lot of people are familiar with D.B. Cooper. Well, Martin McNally was our very own D.B. Cooper. He saw that D.B. Cooper had hijacked a plane and parachuted out, getting $200,000. Well, Martin McNally decided that he could do that, and he could do that better. He was going to try to hijack a plane and get $500,000. He took his time preparing for his hijacking. He did what any man would do in 1971 while researching a topic. He came right here to Bacon Library to find out more about parachuting. Martin McNally had never jumped from a plane, so he came to the library and he studied here for about 6 or 7 hours. He found out everything he needed to know about parachuting. He even was figuring out what his maximum velocity would have to be to jump out of his 727. So after that, Mac had to find out where he was going to hijack a plane from. Now, mind you, it was 1971 and there were not metal detectors in airports. There was very, very little security. However, because of other hijackers, some airports were beginning to have security measures. So Mac checked Detroit Airport, he went to O'Hare, he went to anywhere you can imagine in the area. He finally settled upon the St. Louis Airport. At St. Louis, he saw there were no metal detectors in sight. It would be the perfect place for him to hijack a plane. Now, the next part of Mac's plan was that he needed to find a night that would not have a moon. He thought if he were to parachute from a plane on a dark night, it would give him the best shot of escape. So he found the perfect date, and he decided that he was going to hijack a plane out of the St. Louis airport. He had one of his buddies from Wyandotte drive him down there. He bought a plane ticket, he boarded a plane. He had an attaché case with him. He had some weapons with him. He slipped a note to the stewardess and told her, I'm hijacking this plane. I need $500,000. Now, what Mac did is he asked them to have this plane head towards Toronto. And then he told them from Toronto it would be going to New York. But as we well know, Mac wasn't going to Toronto. He wanted to have a route that went over Detroit, his hometown. So when this plane took off and he finally had all of this money, it took them a long time to get $500,000. Back then, that was a lot of money. He gets the plane to a good cruising altitude, and he determines that it's time to get out. He has them open up the back of the plane, and he's on the stairs ready to jump. He has to coax himself into this a little bit because he's jumping out of a plane for the first time. So he jumps and he's counting to himself. He has to count so that way he knows he is at the proper timing to engage his parachute. As he goes to open his parachute, what happens to him? He loses the money. So here he is, spiraling through the sky without his money. Ultimately, Mac found himself in Indiana. He was very concussed, he was very bruised, and he didn't have his money. He ended up calling a buddy from Wyandotte. It took him a couple of days to get a ride home. The FBI were looking for him everywhere during this, but eventually he made his way home. Now Mac, he'd been out with one of his buddies, and as he came home, he saw some cars in his driveway. So he was driving right past his house on 16th Street when the FBI nabbed him. He ended up going to jail. He was paroled in 2010. So our very own D.B. Cooper, Martin McNally, survived to tell the story, but not to get the $500,000. So now on to the story of Guy Moxley. Mr. Moxley was a 41-year-old bachelor from Texas. He found his way here to Wyandotte, Michigan to marry his wife, Constance. He met Constance through a Lonely Hearts correspondence. It was a type of way kind of to date, like people might date on the internet today, but via mail. So he married Constance in December, but no one heard from him again about 3 months later. He had previously been in contact with his brothers at home in Texas, writing them letters, but they never heard from him again after March. So Mrs. Moxley, she went about her life quite normally. She did everything that a normal wife would do, but she didn't let the police know that her husband was missing. She even at one point was seen hauling cement out of the basement. They reported too to the Detroit Free Press that she had asked some tenants of her home, "If you will not go into my basement, I'll lower your rent." A neighbor had spoke with her, and she described herself as a widow. Mind you, this was even before Guy was reported as missing. So this saga went on for a while. It took about a year before the Wyandotte police decided it was time to really search for Guy. After the strange experiences of Constance taking cement out of the basement, of her asking her tenants not to go into the basement, the Wyandotte police decided that it was time for them to come and search for Guy. So what happened on this day is that Constance Moxley, she put on her best. She put on some red lipstick, she did her hair, and she started posing for photos. She was laughing at the people who were digging for her husband. She was pointing and saying, "You will never find him here," and laughing at them. So what happened with this is they dug and they dug and they dug. They dug all over the basement of her house on Riverbank. They dug all over outside, but they never found Guy. So to this day, we do not know what happened to Guy Moxley. He was never seen again and never heard from again. We can't talk Wyandotte stories without talking about Prohibition. Well, that brings us to my favorite rum runners. And I tell you, yes, I do have favorite rum runners. My favorite rum runners were the Piper brothers. It was Bill and Lester. They lived on Orange Street, right down by where Portofino is currently today. Those homes were boat houses. They were straight up onto a canal. It was the perfect place for rum runners to live. Now, Bill and Lester, they were independent operators during Prohibition. They were not someone who was working with the Purple Gang. They did filter some money through mobster Joe Tocco, but they were really men that were doing their own thing. Now, the Piper brothers, they had their boats moored behind their houses. And Bill Piper had a beloved speedboat. The boat was named the Neptune. Now, one day, he and his brother were out and they were running rum from Canada. But it was not their night. The dry navy got them. them. What could they do but jump overboard from their boat? And they swam home. So you can imagine in the Detroit River swimming home while the marshals have your boat. The funny thing on that is these men reportedly jumped right into bed with their wives that night, soaking wet, so they could say, "Oh no, my husband was sleeping the whole time." Well, Bill, he loved his boat so much that that was not the end of the story. See, he found out that his boat was moored a little bit north in Wyandotte, right up on the river. So what did he do but asked a couple of his buddies and his brother Lester, "Hey, can you drive me up Biddle a little bit?" So they drove him up, right past where his boat was moored, and what did he do but jump into the river with a knife. He floated down the river to where his boat was moored, cut the mooring lines, jumped back into his boat, and took it right back home. So there was Bill with his beloved Neptune again. Now, the Piper brothers were very inventive in the way that they did things. In the wintertime, a lot of different rum runners, they would say maybe take a Model T across the river, or they would pull large pallets of booze all the way across the river. But both of those plans, they had some trouble because they could break through the ice. And what could happen there? You could end up through the ice, or even worse, your rum could end up at the bottom of the Detroit River, and there goes all of your money and all of your rum. So the Piper brothers put a little bit of a spin on this. They would take flat-bottom boats, they would fill them with their booze from Canada, they would make a whole train of these. They would put crampons on their feet, and they would get running and start pulling these boats all the way across the river. Because if it fell through the ice, they wouldn't lose anything. Their booze would be in the boat. Now the tricky part about this is because they had multiple boats, it got a lot of momentum. So they would be running across the river, and if you got tired and you had to take a breath, you would have to jump out of the way so you didn't get run over by your booze. So this is why these two men were my favorite rum runners of Wyandotte. They were really ingenious people. So now I'd like to share with you our most macabre story. This is of Amelia Buck. Now Amelia Buck was discovered at her house on Eureka on August 6, 1952. The interesting part about the finding of Amelia is that she had been dead for up to 6 weeks. That's not very common to be notified that someone is deceased 6 weeks after they have passed away. Now, this was not the only thing going on in this story. When Wyandotte police came to Amelia's home, they found a fan on her. They found that her family had been trying to feed her. She had been clothed, she had been bathed. Now what happened is Amelia's sister, Maddie, thought that she could pray her sister back to life. She thought that maybe the devil was inside of her, or that witchcraft was involved. So if she prayed hard enough and she took care of her sister well enough, she would come back to life. So not only had Amelia's body been in the house for 6 weeks in the middle of summer, her sister had even wheeled her body out onto the front porch to watch our annual 4th of July parade. Unfortunately, Amelia didn't get to watch the parade because it turned 1 block before her house. But can you imagine? You're walking your family to our 4th of July parade and there's a corpse on the porch, all dressed up for 4th of July. Now really, when it comes down to it, this is a very sad story. Amelia's sister Maddie, she was clearly very troubled. After they found her sister's body, you can find many newspaper articles that they were trying to get Maddie committed. Unfortunately, what I found is that she did perish in Wayne County Hospital, as others know as Eloise. And that is the end of Amelia's story.